right, let's get started. So welcome and great you can join us this afternoon for our webinar about are you missing out on opportunities because lenders don't understand your story. So just introduce myself. I'm Sue Hurst. I'm a co-founder of CFO On Call, and we started the business back in 1991. So we're actually celebrating 30 years of being in business this year. And in that time, we've worked with thousands of businesses to help them to improve their profit, cash flow, business value, and the work-life satisfaction and sanity of business owners. So with me today is Brendan Raftery, and Brendan is one of our lovely CFOs, and Brendan's got a long track record in working with businesses to help them get the growth funding that they need for their business and to manage the banking relationships. And so, as you can see, Brendan's a CPA and an MBA majoring in commerce. So just before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions today, if you'd like to just type them into the chat box and we'll answer them at the end. So just before I introduce Brendan, so what this is all about, I'm sure if you've tried to apply for a business loan, you've probably experienced that it can be quite a frustrating exercise because often business lenders and business owners seem to be speaking a different language. And so lenders really need to have confidence in your business and the management of your business to be able to agree to a loan. So it's important to be able to present your proposition in the best possible light. And so we're very fortunate to have with us today Brendan, who's going to talk about that. So Brendan, welcome. I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Sue. So I guess the first slide here I'm going to talk through is normal thing in terms of here's your business story. So when we talk about your business story and where you want to go, what are the opportunities? How realistic are they in nature? And then how do you as a small business or a medium-sized business present these opportunities to a lender or to an investor to get that funding and to take that opportunity on board? And that's why we're really here. So banks tend to look at the cold, hard facts, but you might have been in the process where you actually speak to your banking relationship manager, you get him out on site, he takes a nice look at his well-presented office or well-presented yard or his goods that you're selling. He takes on board that you're a great person and all that, and you feel comfortable in the knowledge that he's going to go back and put together a presentation and present who he needs to present it to, in terms of what is the opportunity, how real it is, how do you present and how do you convince all this is going to go through, and you're really at their beck and call, so to speak. They may come back and say, what's the trading outlook and what's the cash flow requirements required, what's the business appeal value, and he's also testing, here's your credibility, and I guess that is the key part, is when you really take on board how you present yourself to your banking relationship manager, you're really presenting yourself to him as to how he therefore presents you to his bank credit office, who might be 1,000 miles away, so to speak. And they'll always ask, the primary question is, how is the debt going to be serviced? And again, that just gets back to how realistic are these in stories in terms of how soon can you pay it back? Is it got to be paid back next year, the following year? What are the cash flows going? And particularly with these times of COVID, there is an inherent risk where you just need to give the lender the confidence with the information that you are actually providing to him, so to speak. So if I just move on to the next slide, how do you give the lender confidence with the information that you're providing? At first you'll say, well, here is the industry, here's the risk exposure, and even that becomes a bit of a credible thing in terms of how you present that to them. We've seen particular examples at the moment in the building industry where there's a lot of builders going under. There's issues in supply, there's issues in pricing. So the bank will be keen to hear those sorts of stories in terms of where you're going. So the important part there is how to sell and differentiate yourself from others in your industry. you might always have a look and say marketing your business brand to potential suppliers and not just potential customers is a necessary part of a successful business. So if you're selling yourself as to how well you can build something or how well you can grow something, that's all fine. But then the other part is, how do you convince people with your business brand why invest, as in why lend to you, so to speak. You've got to build that happy working relationship, overcoming a reluctance to lend to you based on an industry dynamic. As I said, construction is probably the main one. There is a fear there. How do you get past what you're doing? Often a bank will lend to you based on that industry, and therefore you get the pricing with that. If I go back to what I was saying before, you build this nice, happy working relationship with your bank manager, but then you're relying on him as to how he presents your case, so to speak. They'll always ask about cash flow forecasting. I've got their money talk. So if you're forecasting good, reliable cash flows, that is fantastic. So primary, when I talk about cash flow forecasting and your business plans, who are you selling to? So, a bank may ask the question is, well, who's your key customer? Let's have a look at that in terms of here's a credibility and how well they'll pay you as well. We've heard of people, payments have been delayed because the clients haven't paid you. There's a question about workmanship, reliability, quality, all those matters. So I'll get into that in a second, because that then builds up the confidence in your business as to how resilient you are. And again, if we hit these times with COVID, is how resilient is your business to the full COVID? The construction industry, again, is a clear example of that, where there's always the fear of lockdowns. What does that do? Is the price for goods and services going up? Have you got that into your business plans? Can you on-charge that to the end user, or can you not? So they are, again, key and critical things as to how you will service this debt with the time frame. What is the pipeline for cash from your customer? And getting back to that mention that I said before, here's the customer risk and being paid on time every time. Banks will look at who your customer base is to gauge that success. So for example, if you are selling to, let's say, Woolworths, or let's say Coca-Cola, or a government body, the banks will take a bit of credibility in that because they are good rated businesses. But if you're selling to, in this case, a mum and pop organisation, or a person that may or may not have bank funding or is an unknown name, the banks will take that on board as a customer risk. So if I'm to tell a story with regards to that as a time frame, I spent time up in Papua New Guinea. And one interesting fact that businesses suffered up there was, if they had the government as a key customer, the government was probably one of the poorest payers in the economy up there. So that wasn't a good credibility, but people knew of that risk as well. So there's that resilience and how you'll service your debt, so to speak. So just recently, I got brought on board with a primary industry client, being a pastoral company, who was struggling to get a loan and to be taken seriously by the lenders. So as I go through this presentation, how I came about in getting involved in this particular case study was that they had applied to a well-known Australian bank. They want to go forward with expanding their business with feedlots, with cattle producing, selling cattle at the primary weights to get the maximum returns, and all those aspects. They got the bank relationship manager out to say, here's what the property looks like. Yes, it looks a good property. So they put together a presentation with nice photos. This is what they're doing. This is what they wanted to do. But the bank actually came back to them and said, well, that's great, but cash flow is important. So what we'll need you to do is actually sell some cattle now before their expected time frame to get cash in the business to keep this going. So this was very much how they were viewed, as being almost like what I'd call a mum and pop organisation, and that's how the bank basically treated them. So part of that recommendation through a business mentor that they had was actually, why don't you get on board a CFO, someone who can reshape the presentation to give a little bit more credibility to your banking proposition? And that's pretty much what I came on board to do. So I worked with this particular client in the pastoral company to facilitate the application. It wasn't so much as an inherent knowledge of the pastoral industry, but it was an inherent knowledge of the banking industry and what the banks look for, in particular a credit office. So as you'll see, it's nice to show there's a photo of some cows. That looks a nice photo. but it was more getting to what the bank wanted to see in terms of how this debt would be serviced, what the outlook looked like, and getting some trust and comfort in the numbers there as well. So my involvement actually changed the lender's attitude, where it gives a lot of great pressure to say, it's almost like formed a more robust conversation with the banking officer particularly. So the final outcome, and I'll run through that, is they've pretty much got the loan facility across the line and can expand their business, so to speak. So the presentation that we did, and this is what I mean, so to highlight, here's a nice photo, and it here's the pastoral property, it's well outlaid, it gives a lot of comfort because it's well presented, and that's the first thing that a bank will be looking for. Here's the presentation, so to speak. So again, here's some cattle, they all look reasonably fat, quite healthy. Then we talk about, here's the support facilities, they're putting in a cropping facility. So then when we talk about the contents of then moving on after these nice warm fuzzy photos, here's the growth outlook and what is required as part of the presentation. The statement of the financial position. Having a look at the key features of the station involved, because obviously a bank will be keen to see almost like the insurances behind it, and again, going back into that resilience part. The other part is to highlight achievements in the previous years. Bank will always look for the previous 2 financial years, but it was important in this presentation because the pastoral industry is very much a seasonality sort of outlook where it comes with the seasons. But it was to highlight key achievements, so i.e. to build confidence and trust into what we can possibly do. Then here is the vision, what is required. So again, it's highlighting here is a knowledge, and it gives the bank an appetite to see, yes, these people actually know what they're doing. So again, if I use the phrase mum and pop organisation, it says, no, these are very serious people and we should take some comfort out of that. At the end, it was then putting in a statement of position, financials, and more in particularly cash flow when I come back to as to how we can service this debt. So growth outlook, what is required? So when I went back and had a look at the presentation, there was kind of like 3 key stages. Stage 1 was putting in the feed mill to deliver grain, additives and hay to bulk feed the cattle. Stage 2 was locking in that forward selling contracts, which is also important. And again, that gets back to that point that I said before, who are we selling the goods to? Are they just going to a normal sale yard, or are they going to an abattoir? And then based on the credibility of those 2 areas as to how we can maintain the prices. It was also important when we say that is to provide some independent reference points, whether it's a cattle magazine or here's a price chart. The banks can easily find this, but it's also important to highlight in this as well. Stage 3 was highlighting the water security, because as we'll see shortly when I present the financials, there are some years where rainfall is good and there's also years where rainfall is bad, and that will also have a very key figure on. So if you look at these projected numbers, which I've highlighted there, in terms of income, with the capital injection being part of the income, highlighting the revenue from sales. So it's not a small operation. We're talking between 1.4 million per annum, going up with the expectation of 2.7 million. Expenditure, breaking down to the key aspects being capital works, loan repayments. Here's the net cash flow. So based on this, it was a very strong positive cash flow to be very well managed as well. So it was providing that initial what is required to actually get someone in hook, line and sinker, so to speak. So in terms of supporting that, rather than just saying here's a single page of some nice warm fuzzy numbers, and banks aren't all that keen to see, here's some nice warm fuzzy photographs. They want to see some cold hard facts. So in support, just to give some background, we then moved into the key features of the property. So location, central to sale yards and abattoirs, which is fantastic. Here's the area. These are all just background points. The property description, it's got river frontage, so therefore we're talking about water security again. We're talking about scrub feed, so that's all good. Again, just highlighting the nature of the soil in terms of what we're doing with irrigation and cropping. Here's the irrigation levels. His new areas have been established since 2021, just to show some issues in terms of where we want to go to with the vision. Again, with that, and what we're proposing to do as well. So then we just kept on moving, and this is then what I got back into. Well, where do we go with licenses? So these are key points as well. Here is water, the sort of irrigation that we have, again, just providing more confidence, water allocation. And I'll just quickly go through these. Again, these are all points just to highlight our knowledge and security more so than anything else. So what we highlighted was an extensive network of service lines and concrete troughs to every paddock, storage tanks, all well thought of, all well laid out. And then particularly, here's the residences, here's the main homestead, additional with the on-site manager, because as we grow, we've also got to take on board this and presenting that to the bank. So this will be almost like another question. With all this growth in terms of income, you need resources behind in terms of support workers, support equipment and all that. Is that in your plan as well? So we say yes. So part of this feature is also starting to answer questions that would be asked on the way through, just to provide some extra confidence to the end user, so to speak. So just finishing off the key features, we then highlighted, here's the fencing, because you can imagine with regards to cattle tend to wander, or cattle tend to be taken by people taking on board opportunistic crime. But again, it's just to highlight where we're going with that. Highlighting that they're mostly steel. So again, it's highlighting a quality of service, machinery shed, what we've got on board, hay, workshops, grain sheds. Here's the complex. So part of this is 90% completed. It's all been fully paid. So we're just, again, highlighting, here is not only our enthusiasm, but here is our commitment to what we're going. So the key part here is expressing to the bank or a purpose that you're going to be lending from is, again, your knowledge and where you're going to. So then the next question would be asked, if anyone was looking at this before they asked the question, to say, well, what's your track record in terms of how will you go about this? So what we then decided to do was, here's a summary of achievements. So going back to 2006, and then highlighting the key thing in terms of management, improvements, looking at the capacity, how we're growing that, security with regards to fencing in yards, how we're managing the regrowth in terms of the property, and also therefore getting back into water security. So all these aspects here, apart from being nice, warm, fuzzy photos of nice looking cows, so to speak, is providing a support and a trusting confidence to the person using it. So now what's next? So the capital growth vision. So we've got the bank manager out, we've spoken to him, we've showed him the photos, he can see the cattle, he can probably smell the cattle. What's next in terms of what we want to do? So in terms of looking at the project, so to speak, we then said, well, we'll go back to what we had originally put forward in the previous slides. Stage 1 was a feed mill, stage 2 was a feedlot, stage 3 was water security. And then we put down a little bit more keenness in terms of what these areas were in terms of the cultivation of the paddock, grain and cattle account, equipment as to what sort of equipment we would buy. I've taken on board, here's building of the grain shed, feedlot construction, water security. So again, there was a lot more detail to this, but again, it gives the key consideration that this is not what happens, we'll get it just in time, but there is a lot of thought that's gone into this, and this is what we're managing too. So again, these are all providing the confidence and the trust to the bank manager, to their credit officer, and to a lender. We know what we're talking about and we are committed, because one of the feedbacks that you'll get from the bank is, yes, we'll apply a facility here, but we want to see the invoices that are attached to this, and they'll use this as a reference point in terms of how they sign off, so to speak. So just bear with me, it's okay. So then it was then presenting a story in terms of, well, here's the summary, here's where we want to go to, and if this all comes on board with the bank's involvement or a lending party's involvement, where are we going to? So what we highlighted there was the final outcome being, here's the station with capital improvements, which will only improve the value. We have got a independent valuation, but of course the bank will also come back with our own independent valuation. We'll talk about the breeding herd. We also then highlighted, this is independent sources to say where the price of cattle is going. And it's like anything in these times, everything seems to be going one way, and that's up. So what we also did in this thing, where we highlighted the average selling price, we took a very conservative approach. Because, sorry, me being a CFO, and what my advice would be, if you're looking at these sorts of things, it's a bit like a business plan. A business plan should be something that is basically 99% achievable, and then you look at the stretch targets, so you're not overselling the story. So then we've said the total assets on completion will be the best part of 16 million. So this is by no means a small operation, so to speak. So then now that I've got the banking credit officer and the banking manager clearly aligned, it was then more presenting, here's the financial tradings. And you'll see what I mean in terms of building resilience and building a story in. So we then change the focus to say, here's the net profit before interest, decline in value is depreciation and abnormals, because what I'm highlighting here is more of an operational story, not a tax effect story. So the profits, as you'll see, net profit before these things going back to 2018, 2019 was close to $500,000 at the important KPI return of 64% on revenue. Great result. 2019, the next year, oops, it's certainly gone down. And that was all being driven about, here's a story with regards to drought. So again, let's build some resilience into this. That's why we've got the story around water security. So therefore, I'm answering that question on the way through. So now we're building the story up to saying there's quite impressive returns that are going to be expected with the story of water security, beef prices. This is a fantastic story. So I've still got everyone engaged in presenting this. Then becomes the key and critical part, cash flow. So what we've highlighted here, and again, this is a condensed version, but here is the income, and I've broken that down into the key areas in terms of what we're looking to sell. Then I've summarised, here's the operating expenses, living personnel, and loan repayments. But the critical part here was saying, while they are impressive cash flows, it doesn't factor in what the bank facility will be. But if we look at this in terms of in year 4, the closing balance will be 3.4 million. We're only looking for 1.6, 1.8 million. So that gives the bank a lot of comfort that they will get their money back within that period of time and can structure something towards us, which is fantastic. So in summary, this is all about the growth outlook and what is required in stages 1 through to stages 3, highlighting the achievements, just, excuse me, bring on board the success story today to provide a platform and provide comfort and confidence, what the strategy is. Then here's the key business operational indicators, because one of the feedbacks that the bank will take on board is they'll come back and sign off on what you are planning to spend to make sure that you are within those regimes, but also how you manage the business will also be affected by operational indicators. So I highlighted before the importance in your financial statements, not being a tax loss position, but being an operational story, so to speak. And the banking relationship, what is required? Communication is important. Get the bank manager out, request quarterly phone calls as an update in terms of where you're going, and just build that trust and confidence in. And through the CFO being your financial co-pilot, he can build that story with regards to the best structure with regular reviews, highlighting the financials and highlighting the cash flow that goes with it. So that is the key story, and that's where we're at. So I hope you got some trust and confidence out of that in terms of what this outlook has turned into, and feel free to ask any questions. So I'll transfer this back to Sue, who can coordinate that. So thank you.
Thanks, Brendan. That's great. Do you want to just move it on to the next slide for us, please?
Yep. Sorry, that slide, Sue?
No, the next one. That's it. And if we can just put all of the bullet points there, I think there's a couple more to come up there. One more. That's it. Beautiful. Thanks, Brendan. Okay, thanks. I think that's a really good example of the sort of story that really you need to put together about a business to get a bank to really see, that this is a good proposition and a well-run business. So we mentioned putting your questions in the chat box, and we do have a few questions for you, Brendan. So I'll just read them out to you.
Yep.
So first question is, what's the best way to handle it if you do have issues with making loan repayments to your lender?
I think the best way of handling anything is, again, if I use the word communication, is the sooner you can get in front of somebody to highlight what the issue, then the more forgiving that they will potentially be. The approach that I've taken with the banks that I've dealt with in my own work life previously was to get the communication flowing going, get that element of trust built into the relationship, and then just to highlight, just to here's a regular presentation with regards to here's the last quarter's results, here's the cash flow, more importantly, here's the outlook, here's any issues. So if there is an issue in repayment, then you're starting on the front foot. So I don't think anyone here would disagree with me is if you ring the bank up, i.e. now after this meeting and say, we've got payroll to go through this afternoon. Unfortunately, the money hasn't arrived in the bank that I was expecting to arrive. Can you please help out? If they are to help out, or that are still, if you're able to get a hold of them in this environment where everyone's on email, it's not going to be something that they'll be able to solve within the next 3 hours, so to speak. It'll be here's 3 or 4 days notice required. So that's where building a lot of trust and confidence and highlighting these issues will go a long way to getting that. I won't guarantee that it'll happen in terms of getting that additional facility, but it'll certainly go a long way in terms of your reputation and credibility when asking for that in terms of getting it approved.
Yeah, it's all about communication, isn't it? All right, and another question here. You talked about banks looking at the types of customers that you're dealing with. Do you know whether banks actually do credit checks on your major customers whilst an application is going on?
They will in the background, just to give some advice on that, Sue. I did spend a number of years working with one of Australia's leading banks overseas. So I do know how their credit teams actually work in terms of appraising the nice, warm, fuzzy photos that have been sold. It's more looking at the cold, hard facts. So one of the cold, hard facts is when you say, here's revenue, and you highlight, here's the pipeline of business, as I highlighted before. If you're saying one of your key customers is Woolworths or Coca-Cola, they would say, well, they are a A-rated organisation, so therefore they wouldn't go too much further. But if you're, say, dealing with the local supermarket down the road, again, run by a small business, they would probably do a little bit of a background check on them discreetly to see their sort of credit standing and risk nature there as well. So that may come into play. It wouldn't be something that they would highlight that it has come into play, but if there is any issues with that, they will come back and say, well, there's a question around your income going forward. So one of the issues that I have seen at the moment, particularly here in Brisbane and talking with banks, is that banks are more than happy to lend out in terms of today's credit property market. But as soon as you say you're self-employed, all of a sudden there's a lot more information that goes into providing who are your customers, who's your client base, just to get some confidence in you being paid and the work being ongoing, so to speak. So yes, they will do that check.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? Okay, all right. Well, we're nearly at 1:30, so I think we'll stop there with the questions. But thanks again for joining us today. And look, if you do need any help with managing your relationships with lenders or investors, and you really want to get the story straight to make sure that you get the funds, then having a chat with a CFO could really make the difference between getting the loan or not. So feel free to contact us if you need some help with that. And we'll be making a recording available of the webinar today so that you've got a chance to look through it again and just digest it all. So if you would like that, or you'd like some help, if you want to just type yes into the chat box, we can organise that for you. And Brendan, if you want to just move it on to the next slide, I'll just let you know about the next webinar coming up, which is all about selling all of the hours that you're paying for. So often in service-based businesses, we find that, you might be paying people for 38 hours a week, but you're not actually able to sell all of those hours. So what can you do to maximize your utilisation of your staff and labour. And Scott Goffridge is one of our partners who's got a lot of experience at working with service-based businesses in this area. So he'll be sharing with us some of his experience on the 14th of October, another learning lunch. So thanks again for joining us, and thank you, Brendan, for taking the time to put that information together and share with us the benefit of your experience at helping businesses to get their loans over the line. So hope you've enjoyed it, and have a great day. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.